Hey guys, today I'm going to be presenting the simulation hypothesis. My name is José Carneiro. My academic background is originally in management, but I've been working in the IT sector for a few years now. I became really interested in this topic because I saw Elon Musk giving an interview at Recode, which is like an interesting conference. You should totally check them out on YouTube. And I started really digging into it and got kind of obsessed, but then came to a realization that I'm going to present at the end. So I might want to ask, who has heard about the simulation hypothesis? This is great, OK. So this is going to be a bit corny. Yeah, so Elon Musk wasn't the first to think about this. And that's quite important because the theme has been in philosophy, in pop culture, for a long time. And it's been represented from Descartes to the Matrix, and we're going to show some of those approaches. So the first question I want to ask is, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality? This is directly stolen from Westworld, by the way. If you haven't watched that series, you should totally watch it. It's great. It makes you think a lot about this kind of stuff. So I used to go through life without questioning stuff a lot, and then I started having philosophy classes in high school. And yeah, I was a bit immature, but I had a great teacher, and that really made me get into these kind of topics. And then I started reading about philosophy, started falling into this deep hole, and then this whole simulation hypothesis stuff kind of changed my world in the last few years. But I don't have a fixed opinion on this, and I'm not going to try to indoctrinate you or to convince you that we are living in a simulation. I just want to display the most current arguments for this hypothesis. So this is basically the postulate that we're looking at. The simulation hypothesis proposes that all of reality is an artificial simulation. That means the whole universe, everything you know, it's a simulation. It's just a computer game, or it's just a program running somewhere, and this isn't real per se, or this isn't the most real thing there is. The origins of this hypothesis starts a long time ago. The first records we have of it is in the 3rd century before Christ. In, I was going to say post, a book written by Zhang Zhou, The Butterfly Dream. He writes that he once had a dream he was a butterfly, and then he woke up, and he knew he was himself, but then he thought, how could he be sure he wasn't the butterfly dreaming that he was him? That's kind of a mind twist. Then Descartes, on his meditations on first philosophy, wrote, whatever I have accepted until now as most true has come to me through my senses, but occasionally I have found that they have deceived me, and it is unwise to completely trust those who have deceived us even once. Meaning, all he knew from reality was from his senses, from what he had gathered through his life, but he realized that he had to question those senses and had to question whatever he knew to be true. So in the last few years, we've had some contemporary developments on this issue. And in the year 2003, Nick Bostrom wrote a lot about this, and this is kind of what boosted the argument again. This is kind of complicated to explain in a 10-minute talk, but this is a summary of what he wrote. He pointed out that a technologically mature civilization would have an enormous amount of computing power. If even a tiny percentage of that civilization were to want to run a high-fidelity simulation of ancestral life that would be undistinguishable from reality, the total number of simulated ancestors in the universe would greatly exceed the total number of actual ancestors. I'm going to break this down, but his reasoning is, if almost all people live in simulations, we are almost certainly living in a simulation right now. Let's break it down. I wanted to have a GIF here of something cool, but I didn't have the time, I'm sorry. So let's try to understand this. In the 1970s, the Game of Life was developed. Has anyone ever heard about the Game of Life? Okay, we have Dio, okay. So the Game of Life basically was a set of 4 rules where you painted some squares. You could do this simulation in squared paper. You didn't need to have a computer to do it. And through those 4 rules, these fun patterns emerged. So this is basically a simulation that used to be done on paper, and then when computers came along, it started being done on computers. And it's just a fun way to visualize that with just a very simple set of rules, you can make something happen. And then through the years, we've been advancing in the way we simulate stuff. In 72, we had Pong. In 80, we had Pac-Man. In 85, we had Super Mario Bros. I really like this. In 2000, we had The Sims. I bet probably a lot of you have played The Sims. In 2011, we had Elder Scrolls Skyrim. And last year, we had Red Dead Redemption. So as you can see, the fidelity or the quality of our simulations has been increasing exponentially through the last few years. So we can reason after that in a few years, we're going to be simulating very complex experiences, way more complex than the ones we simulated up until now. The future we think about, it's probably VR and AR, but we really have no way of knowing how the future of simulation is going to be. It's probably going to be way more advanced than this. This is like the next 10 years. And we can expect a great change in this field. So Elon Musk, in that Recode interview, said, at any rate of improvement in a matter of decades, we'll have simulations that are virtually undistinguishable from reality. Meaning, in a few decades, using VR, HR, whatever, you will not be able to know that you are inside a simulation or in real life, per se. So living our lives, we assume that we're living in base reality. This is our assumption, and that we're creating a simulation. This is our current state right now. You can play The Sims. You can play Red Dead Redemption. You have a simulation inside of base reality. In a few years, we know that we'll probably be able to simulate simulations inside simulations. We can already do that, probably, but not in a way this deep. So the postulate is, in the future, simulations, it's going to be simulations all the way down. So you're going to have base reality, and then simulations inside of simulations inside of simulations. So statistically, we should ask a few questions. So we think we're in base reality, but what's telling us we're not in one of the simulations? Also, probabilistically, it's more probable for us to be inside one of the simulations than in base reality itself, because if there are infinite simulations and one base reality, what are the chances that we're in base reality and not one of the simulations? So this is like the big, big question. And through statistics alone, you can assume we're living in a simulation just because the chances are very high. So it's just a matter of probabilities. If we accept that there is only one base reality and infinitely nested simulations, the probability that we are living in that base reality is approximately 0. So taking this into account, we should be asking a few questions. This is going to touch on some touchy subjects. Like, I didn't want to make this about religion, but there are a lot of intersections between philosophy and religion, of course. Just for context, I was raised by Catholics. I'm an atheist, but I feel that my personal beliefs don't enter in this topic specifically, but I just wanted to make that clear. So, sorry, I'm going to finish really quick, okay? Okay, So being a part of a simulation does not necessarily imply that there is a simulator, but if there is a simulator, what's the purpose of our simulator? We should ask ourselves, are we just a fun experiment, or are we being controlled? Please don't put on your tinfoil hats. I don't necessarily believe that. I just want to ask that question. Also, another interesting question. If we're in a game or a simulation, are we the player? Are we an NPC? So this touches back on the philosophy you probably studied at school. Do we have free will? Are we being played by the simulating entity? Is this system deterministic? Meaning, if we're in a computer, and I think most of us are programmers or something, you know that there's no such thing as absolute randomness without an outside system providing it. So if we're in a simulation, it must be deterministic, right? So none of the decisions you're making right now have any impact because they've already been made because it's deterministic. So how do we test this hypothesis? Let's find the glitches. And there's a really interesting, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play this right now in line. There's like a really interesting experiment done by YouTubers where inside Super Mario, they basically found exploits where they could, I'm not going to be able to open it. The slides are going to be posted in the Barcamp event later, where basically through arbitrary code injection, they could do a certain number of jumps in one direction, jumps in the other direction, and insert bytes into the RAM, and then from the game itself, edit it and control it just by doing things that they were allowed to do. So no outside interference, just from the game itself, edit it. And so the proposed solution is, let's try to find the glitches in real life. And if you find anything, please share it, because I'd be really interested in knowing. Let's actually open a GitHub repository, and if you find anything, just do a pull request, open an issue, something like that. Okay, and the last final question is, can we get out of the simulation? And I would say, I personally don't want to. I enjoy doing this stuff, even if it's a simulation. And what difference does it make if we live in a simulation or not? I personally believe that this shouldn't impact your life, and you shouldn't lose hours of sleep over this hypothesis. And you should just be conscious of the possibility, but still live your life, be happy. Don't get caught over on this like I did for a few months. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, what do other people think? I'm not the one saying this. These guys have written and talked plenty about this. Both Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson say the probability of us being in a simulation is more than us not being in a simulation, so over 50%, and that's quite high. So thank you so much.